For nearly 2.5 years, the Ministry of Education took control of the Peel District School Board. It did so after a review found serious concerns about anti-black racism and Islamophobia in schools there and several other issues. Supervision by the province ended in January. Was that a wise move? And how prepared is Peel today to tackle discrimination? Joining us now on that, and as is our custom here, we'll introduce our guests from furthest away to closest to our studio, starting in Calgary, Alberta, with Jamil Jivani, president of the Canada Strong and Free Network. He was the Ford government's Ontario advocate for community opportunities. And here in our studio, David Green, chair of the Peel District School Board. David Bosveld, community advocate and a parent of children in the Peel Board. And Asya Khan, director for education programs at the National Council of Canadian Muslims. And we are delighted to have you three with us here in our studio. Jamil, always good to have you on our program. Thanks for joining us from out west. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to get to you first because I think we need a little bit of background before we conduct our discussion here. Yes. So let's start with this. Why was the Peel District School Board placed under Ministry of Education supervision to begin with?
Just going to give you a quick overview of that reason. There was circumstances that arrived that a trustee made a comment that was not sitting well with the community. The community itself started, advocated and wanted something to be done. At that time, the chair of the day was off, and the person who was chairing at that time did not see that the comment warranted any change.
You want to say what the comment was?
The comment was that a school that is in Brampton that is known as McCrimmon was, student called it McCriminal. And a trustee who was an elected official repeated that. So that was the comment that brought us to there. The community started advocating for changes, and they wanted to see changes happen.
What was your concern about what that comment reflected?
As a person of color, I had major concern because I did speak to my colleagues at the time and said, even though people may not see it as something that is detrimental, but I feel that it needed to be addressed. And not only that it needed to be addressed, the public needed to know that it was addressed.
Okay, and one more on this. In your view, was it a good decision to stop Ministry of Education supervision over the Peel Board last month?
It's a good decision. It's a right decision. And reason why it's a good decision, it's the right decision. The Peel public, we just had a recent election, and I believe the public has spoken loud and clear, and they have made the decision. The election is a democratic process, and therefore that democratic process took place. Not only that, I believe that we're in a place where there's a roadmap, and there's a roadmap in place that the board can follow and able to accomplish the strategic plan and the ministry directive that is presently in place.
Okay, let me get some more wisdom on that. Jamil, let me go to you in Western Canada. Can you tell me whether you agree with the decision for the Ministry of Education to cease its supervision of the Peel Board as of last month?
Well, when the decision to supervise the Peel Board was first made, I think it made sense. As David mentioned, there was dysfunction in the governance of that board. What's transpired since then is that I think the Ministry of Education has shown a lack of concern for children actually learning and getting the support that they need. They focus purely on some of the governance issues, and perhaps on those issues there's been a resolution, but at the same time we've seen massive declines in the academic performance of children in the Peel School Board. So if that was ever part of the concern, the actual performance of children, of students, then I think that they've left this unresolved. There's still a lot of work to do.
Who do you blame for the fact that, if in fact that is still the case, it is still the case?
Well, I mean, I think the system at large is a problem. I think that, the conversation we're having today is an important one because we have people who care. And I think caring is such a big part of this, is people who want to pay attention, want to push the system to do better. But the truth is that if you look at the data and the EQAO results that came out last year, we've got three numbers that are alarming. We've got 43% of grade 3 students who are not doing math at grade level. We've got 53% of grade 6 students not doing math at grade level. And the EQAO doesn't have the numbers in Peel for grade 9s on their website, but province-wide, there's been a 23% decline in the number of grade 9 students doing math in grade level over the last 2 years. So during this time where there's been a supervision, there's also been tremendous struggle for students very much like I was a Peel student. I went to Hickory Wood Public School, Fletcher's Creek Senior Public School, Gordon Graydon Memorial Public School. I was one of those kids struggling. I see myself in those numbers, and it's heartbreaking.
Okay, thanks, Jamil. Let me get laser-like focused back, though, into the issue that we're talking about here, which is the previous supervision, Asya, of the school board, and the fact that it is no longer the case. The board is on its own now. Do you think it can stand on its own 2 feet at this stage?
Well, ideally, I think we would want a board to be self-sufficient, right? As previous speakers have shared, there was dysfunction. Currently, as it stands, though, we do see steps that are being taken to make changes. There has been new leadership, new trustees, but I do think the community is hopefully cautious. We are still kind of holding our breath and seeing what this looks like, what this means. But ideally, we do want a school board that can be self-sufficient. That is, the goal.
Can I ask you a really embarrassing question?
Yeah.
The guy sitting right beside you is the chair of the board.
Yes.
Do you have confidence in his ability to put this together?
Well, I do. I think with the new anti-Islamophobia strategy, I think that is, we had in January, we had a board meeting without supervision, and that strategy went through, and it's a signal to the community that there's a new direction here, and this board is responsive.
David, do you have confidence in the chair's ability to get this board on its own 2 feet properly now?
Well, I don't think it's just up to the chair. So I think the entire board of 12 people has faced the pressure from the community, is well aware of the issues that were raised in the investigation and the review. And I think the director's office, the equity office, the staff have received significant training and policy direction to address a number of the concerns, especially the ministry directives, right? That's the roadmap, as David said. And so I'm hopeful.
Let me follow up on that. You got 2 kids in the school system, right?
Yes.
2 kids in the Peel. What grades are they in?
Grade 4 and grade 10.
Well done, Dad. Good that you know what year your kids are in. Okay, when they came home from school, did they ever on occasion bring home stories that made you shake your head?
They did not, but I'm an involved and engaged parent, right? So I look for things. I've been fortunate with particularly my younger child is in a great school with great staff, great teachers. In grade 2, she had a Black teacher, right? Which a lot of students go through their entire career in the Peel board and don't have that. So representation matters. And my daughter was fortunate to have that experience and be supported by a Black teacher early on.
Gotcha. What were you hearing, Asya, from your community members about what they were either hearing or experiencing in the Peel board, which required supervision to begin with?
So we receive, a number of complaints from our community, and we've been receiving almost one a day around students feeling like they don't belong in the class, bullying, even violence at times, and just kind of this ongoing feeling that this entire kind of system is not really designed with them in mind, right? We're looking at curriculum, we're looking at representation, as was shared, is really important. Students need to see themselves represented, need to feel safe in order to flourish. Kind of the sense was students were surviving a system, not necessarily thriving or feeling like they can flourish in it.
And just to be clear, those 1 complaint a day, is that still or that's before?
So this is across, so NCCM is a national organization, so we get complaints from across Canada.
So this wasn't just about Peel?
Yeah, and beyond Peel, right? I think it's important to recognize that Islamophobia is an issue that's across Canada. The Peel board has taken steps and will continue to monitor, but I think it's something that other school boards should be also be paying serious attention to.
Jamil, can I get your take on whether you think the province ought to have stepped in the first place? It's an extraordinary thing for the Ministry of Education to have to come in and, quote unquote, play the heavy and sort of take over a school board of members or of trustees who have been duly elected by members of the public. Do you think that was the right approach in the first place?
I mean, I think for those sorts of questions, it's important to defer to the people involved. And there were people at the school board, there were people in Brampton, in the communities there, in Mississauga, who felt that they needed some help and intervention to make that school board functional. So I don't think I would disagree with them. I mean, if they felt that that type of intervention was necessary so that there was a functioning school board in Peel, then that was probably the case. I think the concern, of course, that I would have is whether it was focused on all the right issues or focused on a very narrow set of issues that might be, frankly, low-hanging fruit, things that might be easier to generate reports and recommendations on, things that might be easier to generate positive news headlines about, rather than addressing some of the very dark, steep inequalities that exist in the way that children are being supported and educated, as the statistics I mentioned before indicate.
All right, Chairman Green, can I get your view on whether or not you think the province ought to have come in? Were things so bad that the school board actually needed to be taken over, in your view?
It was my motion. I put the motion on the table, asked the ministry to come in, because there was dysfunction. The trustees, a board, need to work cohesively together, and we have to be on the same page. There's no one trustee has more power than the other. And if we're not functioning and not putting the student first, then we needed an intervention.
Are you functioning better now?
Yes, we are. We are functioning better. And, as someone would have said, talk about the ministry directive. One of the differences is that the board for the last 2 years has been operating strictly in ministry directive. Now, as a board, and we come back in, one of the major role of the board is to ensure that the board have a multi-year strategic plan, because through that multi-year strategic plan, that's how we hold the director accountable, and the director then in return hold her staff accountable. So this way we can see whether these strategies that are in place are trickling down into the classroom, because that multi-year strategic plan will also have outcome, time frame, and also reporting back to trustees and what has been done, whether we need to do anything different. And in that, we'll also have student voice embedded in that, community voice, various different parents' voice will be embedded in that. That's at the last board meeting, I outlined the strategy to start that process, because we haven't had one since because it's expired, and the board and staff were just operating on directive. The directive alone is not going to able to do the work that we need to do to empower students, give them the tool that they need to succeed in life.
Let me pick up on that. You talked about the voice of the student and allowing students to be empowered.
Yeah.
And here are some numbers. Now, admittedly, this is from 2018, which is the last year for which we have figures available, but I can't imagine it's changed too much since then. Sheldon, I'm on page 2 here. Could you bring up these graphs here? This is a survey. This is the demographics of the of students who go to Peel schools. For the question of what is your religion and or faith, the largest chunk of people, the largest chunk of students in the Peel School Board are Muslims, nearly a quarter. 1 in 5 is a Christian, 17.6% Sikhs, Hindus 15.7%, 7.9% say no religion at all. And then let's ask the second question, which is, which of the following best describes your racial background? And look at this. Almost half the students in the Peel Board are of a South Asian background, almost half. White students, 13.3%. Black students, 1 in 10. Middle Eastern students, almost 6%. East Asian students, almost 5%. I guess I should, okay, let me go to you on this. That is going to come as news to a lot of people. Do you think it should?
No, I think Brampton, Mississauga are some of the fastest growing and the youngest demographics in the province, and that diversity is reflected. I think we had a number that said 80% of the students do not identify as white, 70% of the teachers do, right? And so in order to address that gap, it's gonna take intentional work. It's gonna take a real effort to bring about a staff that reflects the student body.
Well, let me follow up with Jamil on that. Jamil, in your view, is it a problem if 80% of the student body isn't white, but 70% of the teachers are?
Yeah, well, what I would say is I'm not surprised by those numbers. I grew up in Brampton. My mom was one of the only white people I ever saw in my neighborhood growing up. So Brampton has been very diverse for a long time now, as is the case with Mississauga. The truth is this: if someone is going to argue that we're going to have better math scores for children, if children are going to be better prepared to succeed in our economy and in our education system by changing the race of teachers, I'd just like to see some evidence for that. At the end of the day, like, I wonder, are we focused on the right things? I'm not saying diversity isn't a goal. Of course, that's important. But what is the ultimate outcome we're trying to achieve? I'm a black man, a biracial black man. I have a Muslim name. My father is a Muslim. Anti-black racism and Islamophobia are very real things that I've dealt with in my own life. However, that in and of itself and tackling those problems doesn't necessarily change the outcome for learning for children. And all I want is a conversation about that. What are we going to do about that? And the worry I have personally, as a member of the community, as someone who graduated from the Peel School Board some decades ago, I won't age myself, is that we are focused on the wrong things. And what we're going to do is create a false sense of progress by saying, well, look, we've had a facelift of who the teachers are. We've done all these sort of superficial diversity changes, but the core of the system that is failing kids is not being changed. That's my concern. And if we're going to argue diversity is a fix to this, I would like for someone to explain that. Explain how changing who the teachers are is going to change the math scores. That's what I'd love to hear.
I want to hear the chair of the Peel District School Board respond to that. Does it mean, do these statistics mean that if a quarter of the students are Muslim, then a quarter of the teachers have to be Muslim, and once you've achieved that, you've solved all your problems?
And no, I'm totally agree with Jamel. I believe the important thing is providing training. Training, because we have great teachers who actually believe in students and want to see students succeed. And therefore, what we need to do, we need to bring people together, train them together. Because if I just bring one set of staff in, how do you look at somebody else and understand their background? When we work together, understanding our diversity and what we bring to the table, learn from each other, I think that's what's going to make the difference. Having that staff, that their capacity is built and is developed and able and ready to serve and provided those leadership and mentorship to students is going to be key. And that's, I can tell you right now, I meet with the director of education every single Tuesday because I want to see what's happening, what's taking place. And then I also report now back to my colleagues to say, here's what's been done. And there's some hard work has been done behind the scene by the staff to making sure that this is the path that we go down.
I don't doubt that, but again, at Asya, I'll put this to you. A quarter of the students in the Peel School Board are Muslims. Does that mean necessarily that for the best outcomes, a quarter of the teachers need to be Muslims as well?
So I think representation is important, but I always think of this quote by Verna Myers where she says, you know, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, right? So we might have diverse spaces with a diverse student body, but do those students actually feel like they're included, that they belong? These are the kind of metrics and conversations we need to have to ensure that beyond representation, we ensure that we're creating a system where students can succeed.
Do you think you are right now?
Right now, no. We know that there are a lot of gaps, and there is, movement. There's systemic change. We're hoping the strategy can cause that change. But until we don't see those impacts on our students' desks, until we don't see changes at the student level, we aren't seeing what we need to see.
Do you agree with Jamil that it's all well and good to change the look, if you like, to change the diversity of the staff in the Peel Board? But if you don't get to some of the bigger issues, like whether any of these kids actually know math or English or science, you might be solving one problem, but you're not getting to the bigger problem?
Well, I don't think we need to strive to exactly match the representation of the staff with the student body. I think math scores and EQAO testing scores are one measure, but they're not the only measure. How many students are dropping out? How many are experiencing violence? How many are having racist incidents happen to them in schools, both like individualized and systemic? And I think what the ministry review and the ministry investigation uncovered was hundreds of those incidents, and those are impacting those math scores, right? So if we're not gonna deal with those things, And that's going to take a generation, right? The Peel board has 155,000 students. It's the size of a large Ontario city, right? So shifting that on its axis doesn't stop because the supervisor's been removed.
Let me put that to Jamil. That's a very fair point, which is to say, Jamil, can you get to better science scores? Can you get to better English proficiency and math proficiency if you're still dealing with the daily discrimination, Islamophobia, anti-Black racism that too many parents and students have complained about for years?
No, those things are absolutely related. I certainly wouldn't want to suggest we separate talking about academic performance from students feeling safe and welcome in school. Certainly when I was failing the literacy test in school, when I was failing math classes, it was in large part because I didn't want to be there and I hated being in that building and I didn't have good relationships in the school. So all of those things are absolutely related. But my point is just, why aren't we talking about the academic side of these problems? Why aren't we saying when you're going to put forward recommendations about anti-racism that you would also include some attempt to measure the impact of your policies on the academic performance of children? And if over, let's say, the next 3 years, the policies don't change the academic performance of kids, who's accountable for that? Who loses a job? Who's going to be asked questions when the math scores don't improve? These are the parts that are missing in my view. We just went through an Ontario election last June, and no one asked any of the candidates who were running for premier about the math scores. No one said, what's your plan to make sure that kids are being prepared for success, regardless of what they look like, where they grow up, where their parents are from? This is not even a political issue, a policy issue that people want to talk about. We have a Ministry of Education that has a continuous track record of what I would call virtue signaling, pointing to things like race politics and saying, look how progressive we are. We're using new words. We're using the buzzwords of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Meanwhile, over the exact same period of time that they're adopting this new language, we see dramatic declines in academic performance for kids. And my worry is just where our eyes are looking one way while the real issues are, or let's say, in my view, the more important issues are being sort of brushed under the rug. And so it's not about either or. It's not like my point is competing with anything that the Davids are saying or that NCCM is doing. I think that all these people are doing important work. All I'm saying is let's not lose sight of the bigger purpose of education, which is ultimately education. And when people in power get away with not answering questions about that, it concerns me.
I totally take your point, and I think if I hear correctly, I'm hearing a good consensus around this actual and virtual table for the fact that students do need a safe place to go learn. They need to feel comfortable in their classrooms. They can't get to better math scores and more English proficiency if they don't at least have that as a foundation on which to build. So, Assia, let me ask you, are you satisfied that the Peel Board now has an anti-Islamophobia policy that will enable students to be their best selves?
Certainly, I think it's a big step. It's a historic step. No other school board in the province has adopted a strategy like this, and perhaps even in the country. But like I said, you know, the community has been behind this for quite some time.
You were involved with it, weren't you?
Yeah.
Trying to get that passed.
Yeah, NCCM has been actively involved in the consultation process with community as well as the writing of the strategy. The community is, you know, again, really excited, but again, we're also cautiously optimistic.
Tell me one or two things in the strategy that you think will make a difference in the daily lives of kids in Peel.
So it includes looking at curriculum and looking at how do we create a curriculum that's actually responsive to student needs. It also includes capacity building for senior leaders and staff around how do we address issues related to Islamophobia, and beyond that, how do we actually affirm our students? How do we affirm Muslim identities and what that means? Because we know Islamophobia doesn't impact students the same way. It intersects with a number of different forms of oppression as well.
David, can I get you on that? Do you think the curriculum needs to change in particular ways that would make your kids feel more comfortable in their classrooms?
100%, right? We need to review the materials, maybe take away a bit of the Eurocentric approach, and start embedding diverse experiences in the learning materials. Like, it's not just math that's affected by all of the troubles of Islamophobia, anti-Black racism. It's students' sense of belonging, it's inclusion, and it's safety, right? And so I think when we start with the curriculum, we look at representation, we look at how students are treated, how they're being disciplined, right? How they're being excluded sometimes, suspended, excluded, and expelled at disproportionate rates. once we start addressing those things, we'll have kids that perhaps love being in school and develop a lifelong love for their learning.
Jamil, let me put that to you. Do you think, given the unique makeup of the student body and the Peel board, does there need to be a change in curriculum?
Look, if people have ideas on how to better engage students, how to adapt a curriculum to be more relevant to their day-to-day life, their cultural experiences in this country, I think those are all very important. The only thing that I would say is, there's a lot of perhaps being used in the conversation around these things, where we sort of assume that addressing some of these things will lead to some trickle-down benefits in academic performance. There is a lot of research on this, and a lot of it shows that the way that we do instruction around things like math, reading, writing makes a difference. The ratio between teachers and students makes a big difference. There are a lot of things that are about the instruction and delivery of education services that are colorblind, but do make a difference in whether kids of any background would be able to be supported appropriately and learn. These are the sort of structural changes I'm talking about. For as long as we continue to have the system structured the way that it is, with the current ratio between teachers and students, the lack of extra help that a lot of kids need in the school building that they're not getting, you can do a lot of these changes. I don't necessarily believe that it's going to be linked to the changes in learning outcomes that we need. And frankly, as long as we continue to allow the Ministry of Education and other policymakers to have us focus on an assumed trickle-down benefit to academics, as opposed to asking for direct and specific policies that will address the academic concerns that parents and communities have, then I think that we're basically allowing for, people in power to kind of get away with not making the changes that I think we know they can make and should make.
I should get the chair of the Peel board to respond to that.
Yeah, definitely. I personally believe that if we're going to make a difference, we can't put a Band-Aid and what is there. We need to change that. And the changes that we need to see in the curriculum itself, because students learn differently. I believe every child can learn. There is when we hear about student have this disability and that disability, I believe every child can learn. But they need to see themselves embedded in the curriculum, embedded in the work that they need to be doing.
Is that the case today?
That we are working towards that right now. Prior to, I would say no. Because we have to find ways and means, and working with students and their family, working with the community, for students to see themselves as part of the fabric. They need to feel comfortable in the spaces that they are and safe enough to able to speak up, even when there's something affecting them, that they can speak up without being worried about reprisal. And their voice needs to be heard. What we are doing right now, we are making sure that the student voices are embedded in everything that we do as we go forward.
All right, with just a few minutes to go here, that sounds like a pretty good mission statement as to what defines success in the Peel board today. Let me ask you, though, Assia, when you think about what success looks like for students in Peel, what does that list include?
I think broadly it includes students feeling safe and that they're included in their education, right? And the spaces that they're occupying. So that could be through success in academics, but it also could be a sense of belonging in the space that they're occupying. And there's a number of ways that we need to do that, and I know the speakers have shared. It's not a singular issue. I think it's multifaceted.
What does success look like to you?
It looks like we are constantly monitoring and reviewing and checking back with students and families, and engaging the improvements, both in test scores and graduation rates, but also in directly talking to students and families about their experience. And then we adjust, right? We have the ministry directives sort of as a very robust, aspirational goal, right? If they were implemented fully and totally today and trickled down to every student's classroom, we wouldn't have to have this conversation today, right? But I think we all know that being hopeful about them and really holding the board trustees, the board director, and the Ministry of Education accountable to not checkboxing this work and staying engaged on this piece of work. And to Jamil's point, the other stuff, the test scores, the math scores, all of that stuff, especially over the past 3 years, right, has been impacted by online learning, the COVID pandemic.
Absolutely.
And really, to his point, the ministry's defunding of public education, right? And that results in the class sizes, the lack of supports in class rooms.
That's a whole other show, David.
And I don't think David Green himself and his board of trustees can fully address that without the minister's support.
Certainly not in our last minute here. That will take some. You're going to stay engaged?
Absolutely.
You're going to hold his feet to the fire?
100%.
You ready for that?
I'm ready for that.
Jamil, let me give you the last minute here. What does success look like for you?
I think, aside from the obvious that we have better test scores, better graduation rates, some of the things that the other panelists here have addressed, I would just add two quick things. One, that students aren't made to stand alone, that parents, that adults like me who don't have kids, take interest in the issue, hold people accountable, vote on this issue, ask people in power to do something about it, and not just continue to be apathetic while we see massive declines in academic performance of children. That's number one. Number two, that we do not allow for class inequality to be lost in all of this. I know that it's important to have balance between understanding identity-based issues like anti-Black racism and Islamophobia, but the biggest predictor, quite honestly, of who struggles in our economy, who struggles in our education system is class. People who are in a low-income household, regardless of their race, people who grow up with a single parent, regardless of their race, they're struggling, and we need to make sure that we don't lose any of those people because we're focused on one particular ethnic group or one particular religion.
That is Jamil Jivani from the Canada Strong and Free Network. We thank him, along with David Bosveld, community advocate, David Green, the chair of the Peel District School Board, and Asya Khan, National Council of Canadian Muslims. Good of all of you to join us here on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.